Tony Dunn. Ain't nothing to it but to do it, brother. Let's roll.
In a world where Carolina Panthers fans have an insatiable thirst for Panthers news and opinions, only one podcast roars ferociously. It's the C3 Panthers Podcast.
Yo, what's the deal, Panther fans? Tony Dunn here with the C3 Panthers Podcast, a little impromptu type stream. We've been working it on the ropes in the background, so short notice here, 5:45, an abnormal time for us, but already got some people in the chat live hanging out with us. And today we're doing a Panthers mini camp wrap with Mike Kaye of the Charlotte Observer. And when I say wrap, I mean it.
Kick it over here, baby pop. And let all the fly skimmers feel the beat. Drop.
Hit it, Mike. Oh, no, I'm just put you on the spot. No, I'm just kidding, man. You don't got to spit no bars, man. Welcome to the C3 Panthers Podcast, man. And we just wanted, thank you for your time and welcome to the show.
Thank you, man. Beastie Boys, starting things off. I like it. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I guess it's been a while. I guess we connected a while ago, but you made me earn my Panthers beat writing chops before you had me on for this first time as a Panthers beat writer. So I'm happy to be here.
No kidding. We caught up with you in 2017 when you were covering the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then you went to Philly, now in Charlotte. And before we get in, I got one question for you when it comes to the Jaguars. Isn't it crazy how weird people say it sometimes? Jaguars.
There's Jaguars, there's Jaguars, there's Big Cats, there's people just say Duval sometimes because there's actually a running joke. I'll give you a behind the scenes thing. Joe Person makes fun of me all the time because I am terrible at pronunciations. Like if there's somebody that I'm not sure of, I have to find another way of pronouncing their name, just like in person. I got to be better at that. But
my thing too is when I say Jaguars now, is when I hear other people say it weird, and then when I try to point it out, I feel like I'm sounding weird saying it. Just to continue to connect there, when you said you're bad at pronunciation. My stick, it's not a stick, it's completely authentic and genuine. I'll get someone's name like 80% right, but I'll get like I'll flip flop the first name for something. So I used to call Jacoby Brissett Jacoby Forsett. Oh. Remember the running back? And I was just like, I knew who I was talking about. My friends are like, it's not a stick, folks. He's really confused. So anyway, we're not confused today. We're here to talk about the Panthers mini camp, little OTAs, and I wanted to pick your brain on some of the top headlines that are coming out or top stories coming out of mini camp as we wait. We've got about a month, maybe a month and a week until training camp comes. It is going to be the doldrums of discussion. And we're going to need some stuff to talk about and to read. So I suggest everybody goes to the Charlotte Observer and signs up for their 99-cent subscription and getting ready for training camp. We're going to get you primed right here. What's your number one? What's on your burning mind? What's the number one story for you coming out of Panthers OTAs and training camp?
Well, the number one pick. That's what it is. Go. I mean, when and obviously I've been a journeyman beat writer. I've been kind of all around. When you have the first overall pick or you draft a quarterback in the first round, that's the story. Because ultimately the success not only of this year, but beyond is going to be on his shoulders. And obviously Bryce Young is a very successful prospect. I will tell you, I've watched 7 of his workouts. So 2 in rookie mini camp, 3 in OTAs, and then 2 in mandatory mini camp. He, outside of maybe this last workout, he's made an incredible play in every single one of those workouts. His off-schedule timing is a trademark trait of his. That's been on full display. I think he's very good at responding to negative plays, especially during mandatory minicamp. It felt like he struggled a little bit because the defense was a little bit ahead there. which isn't particularly surprising, but OTAs are typically meant to favor the offense because you're doing a lot of installs. The offense can do a lot more things than the defense can. There's no contact, etc. But he seemed to struggle a little bit. But what was impressive about him is he would make a play the next play. Like, it wouldn't phase him. He would connect on the majority of his passes and everything like that. What I want to see in training camp, all signs seem to point towards him being not only the guy who takes all the first team reps, but named the the week one starter and a preseason starter. So I want to see what the pressure is like once he is getting back to camp. He's the guy. Everyone knows he's the guy. Hey, you got to get prepared in these next 5 weeks for the season.
The size has been on people's minds since he was drafted, but we've continued to tell ourselves he is the most prepared, the guy that has the sort of Luke Kuechly gene to him when it comes to preparation and ability. I heard Doug Gottlieb talking about the NBA Finals, and he was talking about how Jokic isn't the most athletic dude, but it's like the Tom Brady's, the Jokic. These guys, they're not the most athletic, but they have something special to them. They have sort of characteristic that is innate to them. Are those characteristics palpable enough to make us feel better about his little size?
So I think with the size thing that a lot of critics miss is he's got a very high release point. He is very easily able to avoid batted passes at the line. Everybody gets batted passes at the line. We saw 3 throughout this offseason program. I'm sure there were ones where we were away. But realistically, when you can see the field the way he does, and you can see it on tape, his eyes stay high. He knows what he is looking at. I think that's a really strong advantage. If they're going to run a lot of RPOs, if they're going to run a lot of shotgun, the height is less of an issue, in my opinion. That said, what I'm worried about is durability.
Yeah, I mean, if he gets hit, like the first time he gets blasted, we're all going to be waiting on bated breath.
Well, in college, in my notes, I wrote every single time he takes a big sack, and what I mean is a big sack, like a body sack, it looks like a truck running over a puppy. Like, it really does kind of, it is like visually frightening, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's going to be in the back of your mind until he takes a few licks, during live games. And I think that's not going to go away until you see him bounce back up. But what I will say is his quick processor allows him to not only move around the pocket to see things before other people do, typically in the league, but he's also relatively elusive. He isn't the best athlete, like you said, but his elusiveness comes out of thinking quickly. And I think that's been put on display a lot here in the early weeks of his tenure. I'm interested to see what happens when the bullets actually fly, obviously, but I think facing the Jets in joint practice, as the Observer first reported last month, those are going to be really strong practices because he's going to face a different defense. He's going to face some high tempo practices, and he's going to be wearing pads. And I think that's going to be a really important predecessor to the preseason.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, is that the size is only concerning if he gets like, you almost want to see him not get picked out of the ground, like where he's like imprinted, all right, or hit into row 7. He is, I'm trying to temper, my concerns aren't with him getting hurt. I'm trying to temper my expectations at this point of excitement. Like, and how excited should we truly be about this offense? Now, this is the season for rose-colored glasses. This is the season of optimism for any fan base where we're all undefeated at this point. The Panthers, though, while we've gotten a lot, we've gotten the super squad of coaches or this is the fan narrative. And I know you're very well aware of the fan narrative, the super squad of coaches, the offensive minded group of people, the young up and coming defensive coordinator, seasoned veteran staffed as well. So there's a great balance. And then you get the most impressive. They say if he was 6'2", he would have been, nobody would have questioned his capability. The guy that could be a distributor, the point ball. And now we're going the point guard, should I say. And then you get Boogie Sanders. Is it Boogie or Booby? Is it Booby Sanders? Booby.
Yeah, Booby, Miles.
Booby Sanders, who I think is a steal in fantasy football personally, because I think he's going to get a ton of work with the Panthers. But we've gotten some weapons, it looks like. But at the same time, we don't know anything about those weapons. Terrace Marshall Jr., unknown. Adam Thielen, old. Mingo, great upside. We love the pick, but we don't know anything. How excited should we be? Do you want to temper our expectations as fans on the offense, or do you want to flame the fire?
I would temper them. I mean, look, I think if you're looking at this as anything other than a 2-year rebuild on the fly, you're doing yourself a disservice. I think the wide receiver group has depth. I don't think there's a guy who particularly scares the secondary. I think the tight end room's gotten better with Hayden Hurst, but I don't know that you can trust him to be healthy for a full 17 games. He's also never truly been the guy from the, across the middle standpoint. He was the starting tight end in Cincinnati last year, but his numbers aren't terrific. I do think Ian Thomas has improved with the new staff. I do think Tommy Tremble is going to be improved. I think Terrace Marshall is in for a breakout season, but a breakout season for him really is like 800 yards and 4 touchdowns. So again, I think this is a group that's got to kind of learn and grow and do their thing. But I don't think there's as you can hear my kid yelling in the background.
It's okay. I got 3.
I think it's unfair to put the expectation of this team just blowing up the league. Typically, you see quarterbacks take a massive jump from year 1 to year 2. The way they've spent money, it's apparent that they think that this is going to be one long step in a 2-step process. I think when you look at the radical changes on defense, that's going to take some time to kind of get used to. They are converting a lot of players to new positions, and frankly, they don't have a ton of depth on defense. They don't really have a ton of depth on offense either. I mean, wide receiver, everybody wants every team wants 4 guys who can legitimately play in the league. They've got about 6, but that doesn't mean they're the most talented wide receiver group. They just have guys who can play. And I think it's going to be an interesting feeling out process that first month of the season, especially with the way the schedule is, because they're on the road a lot and they have tough opponents on the road. It's not just road challenges. You're going to have to figure out what this rookie quarterback can do right away. And you're going to have to hope that the offensive line sticks together and plays well. I think the offensive line kind of overachieved last year. I think this team in general overachieved last year under Steve Wilkes, which is a testament to him. But I think now you're square back to reality, and you've got to build on top of that. This team to me looks like an 8-9, 9-8 team. And I think, that's kind of where I'm at.
I so wish that you would have gotten to Charlotte about 8 weeks earlier, because with the story you said, we were talking earlier, and you said you got there in week 4 of last season.
Mm-hmm.
The story though is that, and we've got PTSD from when it comes to Matt Rule.
Sure.
But the story really, or the feeling we had, was it looked like a burning building in the background, like that meme of the person sitting in the fire, the dog sitting in the fire. We felt sometimes that like maybe fans were exaggerating it. We were just being so extremist, fanatical, like fans tend to be. But then there was a headline that popped out recently that Tommy Tremble said he felt like he's finally getting coached up. Can you just speak?
Yeah, that was my story.
Yeah. Is you've been with 3 organizations now, covered the beat for at least 3 professional teams. How is the the OTAs and the mini camps felt under this super squad? Is it felt like particularly well organized, or is it just like everybody? I mean, look, I think Frank Reich's too nice. He's just like, everybody's awesome, dude.
That's why Deuce Staley is here. So what I would say is this: they're extremely efficient practices. Like, there's no wasted movement. Everybody does their thing. Like, something that I was really impressed by, and typically in the league, you do this in training camp. But like the first OTA session that we were at, they split up the groups from the first and second stringers and the third stringers. Like, they made sure that the third stringers got reps. Matt Corral got a ton of reps off to the side with the deep depth players. And then they had Bryce and Andy kind of, going back and forth. And they did it in such an efficient way that there were added reps. You took advantage of your time. Frank knows how to coach. He knows how to run an NFL practice. So does Andy Dalton. That's part of the reason why you bring him in here, to show Bryce Young how to do it. And I think, like you said, you've got guys like Josh McCown. You've got guys like Thomas Brown. You have by the way, Thomas Brown, I think, is the most underrated hire on the entire staff. You've got guys like Edro Everett. A lot of guys have been around very smart coaches. They've been around winning programs. That's really important. Jim Caldwell's there. Deuce Staley won a Super Bowl. Like there are people that are extremely intelligent and time effective on this staff. And I think from a time effectiveness standpoint, it was a very good OTA workout. I'm not going to say it's the best workout I've ever been to. I mean, Doug Peterson ran workouts very, very well. Despite the amount of vitriol he got on the way out, Doug Marrone ran practices pretty well. Nick Sirianni ran practices extremely well, and his biggest mentor is Frank Reich. So I was not surprised in the slightest by how these workouts were managed.
Why do you say Thomas Brown most underrated hire?
This guy understands a ton of football. He's a guy who's played the game at the NFL level. He's worked in the college game in ways that I think will affect the way he's able to communicate with players. Adam Thielen came out the other day and said he was the most impressive guy in the building that he met. And I also think he's a guy who can understand both the passing game and the running game. He's been a tight ends coach. He's been a running backs coach. He's really, really smart. Every opportunity we've had to talk to him, he's kind of blown me away with how much he is able to explain scheme and thought process. And that's like a big thing with the current NFL player. They want to know the why of a play. And I think that's part of the reason why Matt Rule kind of failed, at least from my limited interaction with him. I think Thomas Brown, there's no wasted movement in what he has to say or what he does. And I think the players have really identified with him as a guy who understands the game, both from the player perspective and the coaching perspective.
We took a lot of, I guess the word be solace. We were happy with the way the offensive line played last year. The Panthers have had a long history of terrible offensive lines. And when we get one that's average or above average, we think it's the best damn thing ever. I mean, hell, we went to the Super Bowl with a damn average offensive line, and because of a Superman behind that line. But last year, a lot of promising things with a rookie left tackle. Ike Ekwonu played really well down the stretch. Bradley Bozeman comes in, and he really kind of, it felt like the line started to gel when he stepped in there at center. But they also suffered some injuries when it comes to Austin Corbett, and Brady Christensen also had a late foot injury too. What is the sentiment? What do you think the real sentiment about the offensive line is in the building and from your perspective? Because I think we tend to, fans sometimes are like, well, it was good last year, it's going to be good this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're high on the offensive line. I don't think you take Bryce Young unless you feel like you have at least a sturdy offensive line. They made a surprising move in restructuring Taylor Motton, which basically guarantees in the next 2 years. He's getting a little bit older. I think he's probably a top tier right tackle in probably a top 10 right tackle in the league, maybe a little bit better than that. I think they feel good about him, even though he is getting older and hasn't been extremely consistent. I think Icky, to the moon. They are thrilled with what he showed. He was tremendous last year, especially after some early hiccups. Bradley Bozeman's a guy who is very good at what he does, but what he does is somewhat limited. He is a power blocker. He is not, you're not going to run a lot of outside zone read type of play, or you're not going to run a lot of zone blocking scheme with him. He's just not that type of player. He's like an old school grinder, knows the grindstone kind of guy. So he affects how the guards typically play. The tackles are sturdy. You can depend on them. Awesome. They re-signed Cam Irving, who's a solid swing tackle. You probably don't want him in a game regularly, but he can fill in if a guy gets injured mid-game with this, whatever. At guard, Austin Corbett, in my opinion, was the most underrated player on the entire offense last year. I think from a right guard standpoint, he's terrific. He's also coming off an ACL injury. We know that he's going to miss time. He's probably going to start on the PUP list entering training camp. That's not unusual. The guy who's been replacing him, they are enamored with in Cade Mays. 6th-round pick last year, really impressed a lot of people with his versatility, got some fullback snaps. He is a guy who I think has starter upside. And when you get to left guard, it's very interesting because while Brady Christensen was fine at left guard, he was clearly the least, I'm trying to choose my words properly. He was probably the least productive of the 5 starting linemen towards the end. He was fine. Left guard, fine. But I think Chandler Zavala, they've brought up a lot how much he's played next to Icky at NC State, and I don't think that's a mistake. I also think when you look at Brady Christensen, if you're going to run a lot of power blocking scheme, that's not really his game.
He might be better suited at at tackle.
Right, which is why if they were to put him and Zavala in a competition at left guard, you could look at him as a swing tackle, which, for one, gives you really good value because then you don't have to keep Cam Irving. And on top of that, you've got Zavala, who's on a cheap 4-year deal, and he can grow with the offensive line. He's a guy who's played with Icky before. I'm just telling you, Zavala's got really high upside. Of their picks, not counting Bryce, I think he was the best value pick that they had. I think that when you look at when it's all said and done, I think he's got Pro Bowl potential. He's a really good player. And as Sideshow Rob, who incorrectly brought up that Terrace Marshall is the Panthers' best red zone option, he is correct. Brady Christensen could eventually be a right tackle in this league. And I don't think he was a great fit for left. I think right tackle makes a little bit more sense. But I think when you look at the way that they've restructured Moton, like, he might not get the chance because by the time Moton's probably out of here, Brady's.
So is he.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But I do think they feel really good about Mays and Zavala long term. Zavala was injured throughout most of the practice, or he was injured throughout mandatory mini camp, and so he didn't really get to practice. But I'm interested to see what happens at left guard because I do think a lot of people have like this confidence in Christensen, but I do know internally they really like Zavala a lot.
Last offensive question. You brought it up, Terrace Marshall Jr. I guess you were referring to Adam Thielen being the best red zone option since he's only caught a bazillion touchdowns in the last 10 years. But Terrace Marshall Jr. is a player that all of us we've wanted to break out. We were sold the hype for Joe Brady's offense and all of that. And then he's just been in the doghouse with Matt Rule. He must not have taken great notes, but he looks like he's really putting in the work in the background, committed himself, it seems personally, not that he wasn't committed before. And look, as people are talking about him, is the hype going to come with production this year, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a couple of weeks ago that he's on the cusp of a breakout season, but a breakout season to him needs to be taken into context, right? He had like 450 yards and a touchdown last year. The touchdown came in a meaningless effort against the Bengals. It was late in the game, whatever. What he needs to do to take his next step, and I know that there are people internally who feel this way, is he's got to use his size to his advantage, which I think he has done a good job of. There was a play in particular against Keith Taylor during an OTA practice on 7-on-7 where he just leaped over him, and it was a spectacular play. Unfortunately, the next day, Taylor won that battle on basically the same go route. But I think for Terrace Marshall, the thing will be, can he play X? Because you've brought in a ton of guys who can play Z in the slot. And his body type, he's got the speed, he's got the size. I mean, if he can get off...
He's got the hands. Why can't he?
Right. So, well, I think it comes with the maturity of playing. And some guys, wide receiver is one of the hardest positions to play in the NFL. And some guys don't get it right away. As much as we love to look at Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and the away. And I think Sean Jefferson's an excellent coach, another guy who is a very underrated hire on this staff. And I think you'll see Marshall and Mingo compete for a job. I think long-term, they'd like for Mingo to be either the X or the big slot and Marshall to be the Z guy. But right now you're paying DJ Chark, who can really only play Z effectively. And then you've got Adam Thielen, who can play X, Y, and Z, but you'd prefer him in the slot. So It's going to be interesting to see how that kind of all generate. I think Thielen will lead the team in touchdowns. I think receiving touchdowns. And I think he'll lead the team in yardage, but it wouldn't shock me if he was like a 9-5 guy and Marshall was an 8-4 guy. And then Mingo.
That would be incredible.
And then Mingo is like a 6-3 guy. And then you've got Chark is like a 450 and 3 guy. Like they're going to spread the ball around. Like that's something that Panthers fans really have to understand is that part of the reason why they haven't gone out and like gotten, the top wide receiver, whatever, they're like Frank Reich is known for moving the ball around. He wants,
and that's Bryce Young's superpower.
Right. Exactly. And so I think you're not going to see like really big fantasy numbers from these wide receivers, but I do think you'll see it spread around quite effectively. Nick Sirianni did something very similar in Philly his first year. And I think you'll kind of see like a player du jour or player of the week sort of, depending on the matchup and depending on the scheme. I think there'll be a Hayden Hurst game. I think there'll be, we'll have games where we'll be like, oh, that's the Terrace Marshall game. That's the, whatever.
Other than a few minutes more of your time, I do have a personal request. Is other than we've got a big audience on the impromptu with no advertisement. So thank you for that. Go check out Mike Kaye's work at the Charlotte Observer. You can get your online subscription for just 99 cents. That's nothing, man. $1 to help not independent, but local media, the people that know these teams the best. My personal request to you, Mike Kaye, is I'm putting a bug in your eye. I teach history for a living at a community college. I like to do this. I got into the podcasting because I got tired of arguing politics with people, and I've just gone apolitical. I only talk about politics of the past, and I like to argue about how the Falcons suck. But I do write. I keep my, one of my creative outlets is to just write some fan stuff for CarolinaCatChronicles.com, our website. And one of the little stories I got working in the background. So if you could get me a soundbite from a coach or from a play or like somebody, just put it in your notebook for a long time down the road. Muhsin Muhammad, his first 3 years in the league, who's, by the way, Panther legend, Muhsin Muhammad. He's also 6'2", 215, just like Terrace Marshall Jr. His first season with the Carolina Panthers in 1996, he played in 9 games, started 5. He had 407 yards, 1 touchdown. His second year, he had 27 catches, 317 yards, 0 touchdowns. Year 3, he had 68 catches, 941 yards, and 6 touchdowns. If we're talking about an 806 touchdown type season, which I didn't put that number in your head. You said it.
I said 4 touchdowns.
Oh, dang
let's
it.
not get crazy here, but yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is, and I don't want to put a player who has not done very much in the realm of a great, but I want to track the comparison and the evolution of a player just because they haven't done greatness in incrementally. Muhsin Muhammad improved to where year 4, he was a 1,200-yard receiver, year 5, 1,100-yard receiver. I'm doing a side-by-side analogy of Muhsin Muhammad to Terrace Marshall Jr. Somehow we got a dovetail. We need a bite, a sound clip, a something, a note, an anecdote, something for this story and this trajectory. Am I reaching too far as a fan?
I mean, it is.
He's about to say yes. I would never write those stupid stuff like this.
Story ideas here. I
don't care, man. You know how lazy people are. I can tell people to do everything and they still wouldn't go write it.
So it is something that I've thought about. What you said is not a surprise if you caught my head going like this.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll see. Maybe Steve Smith will walk by and I'll be like, hey, who does Terrace Marshall remind you of?
Yeah. That's what we need.
That's
what we need. All right.
Yeah.
Let's turn our attention to the defense. The biggest, with all the excitement, Panther fans have we've hung our hats on our defense for the last decade. We're really the entire creation of our team. If you think back to our first Super Bowl appearance, filthy defense. When we started this podcast in 2013, 60 sack defenses. We've been a defensive team full of defensive coaches. This is our first team of being an offensively led coach team, but also really it feels like all the emphasis has been put on that offense. We are transitioning to a 3-4 defense. They try to say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. We're only in base package 20% of the time. The questions are all surrounding the defense. And the only question I don't have about this defense is will Brian Burns be extended? Because the answer is emphatically yes. They have zero choice. They're going to have to do it. What should we expect from this defense? It's just unknowns to me, Mike.
So the transition to a 3-4 is really interesting. The way that they describe the other pass rusher makes me think that they're going to run a lot of underfronts. And for that, I mean, you're going to get kind of a hybrid defense. They've been kind of choosing their words wisely with that. They do have, they did sign Shy Tuttle, who can be an undersized nose, but I'm guessing that he plays more 5 and 3 technique. I think Derek Brown's going to be a guy who flourishes in this defense because it'll allow him to get upfield, but he can read and react and stop the run the way he is. He's agile enough to really do some good things. Panther Pickle, I just want to give you a shout out. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate you subscribing to our work. Anyway, I think they are going to be in really good shape from a starting group standpoint. My concern is mainly with their depth. They are very light at inside linebacker. I will say Shaq Thompson has completely exceeded my expectations in this 3-4 alignment.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Frankie Louvu has looked terrific.
That's my player that I think is going to be the name we're saying all year long.
Yeah, I think Derek Brown's going to be a guy who's very special, as I said. It depends on who they use at nose tackle. Marquand McCall is a guy that people should kind of start studying a little bit. He's a guy who fits that natural nose tackle position.
Yeah.
They like John Pennicini, but he hasn't been able to get on the field, really. He's a guy that worked with Todd Wash in Detroit, retired due to some personal stuff and had some shoulder issues. They're working him in. He's kind of like a, coin found under the couch sort of situation there. They like Deshaun Williams. He's going to be rotated behind Brown and Shy Tuttle pretty regularly. At edge, obviously, that's the popular discussion. They did like Leonard Floyd, did not want to pay him what he wanted. He settled for.
So there was some interest there?
Yes. Yeah. We reported it back in April, I believe. That
a lot of connections to Giro, right?
Yeah.
Because he's going back to LA and, I mean, just scheme fit too.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I think it's interesting, right? Because I get this question all the time about them signing a veteran pass rusher like Yannick Ngakoue, who I covered in Jacksonville and who worked with Frank Reich in Indy and Todd Wash in Jacksonville. Ngakoue is going to want more, and he's less of a fit than Leonard Floyd was. Ngakoue is like a pure speed edge rusher. And if you're going to just sign that guy, you might as well go with Marquise Haynes, who had a dominant mandatory minicamp last week. Dominant. He was in the backfield.
Really? 6-year guy. He reminds us a lot of a former Panther, Mario Addison. It took a long time to come around. Not a long time, but a guy that just had to work their way up and turned out to be a good player.
Well, he's a speed edge rusher, so he's not a guy who was going to ever be a read and react guy. He wasn't a guy who was just going to win with a bunch of moves. I wouldn't go to the bank on that one, Sideshow Rob. But what I would say is you want guys in this defense who can grow with this defense. And I think they've very clearly shown with the trade of DJ Johnson, they want to go with a more cost-effective standpoint. So I wrote a stock watch today, 2 guys that I think might not have fit the scheme as well as I thought they would have are Brendan Smith and Amari Barno. I think those guys, it was very easy to kind of unnotice them. You know what I mean? They didn't, those 2 guys that with their athleticism, without pads on, they should flourish. And I just didn't notice them really.
That's crazy because they're so fast.
Yeah. I mean, look, Barno was always going to be a weird upside player. That's why he fell in the 6th round. I mean, he's got unreal size, speed, all that stuff. 3-4, you're going to have, there's a lot of technique to it. There's a lot of scheme stuff that you have to learn. And look, maybe it's just early in the process, but I would say the Camus Grugier Hill's the number 3 inside linebacker. I think when Brian Burns is back, I think Marquise Haynes is no shorter than number 3. And Yetur Gross-Matos has surprised a few folks.
A third year, the defensive end is one of those. Look, we all give up on, and the NFL too, the not for long league, they also give up on people a little too quickly. And that's why I continue to say there's a demand for a developmental league. But while it won't make money, it's necessary. The point that I'm trying to make is that unless you're a top tier defensive end, whether it be for our history, it would be a Julius Peppers, or maybe like a Jadeveon Clowney or Myles Garrett, that type of player. It really feels like even when you're a great prospect, it takes some time at defensive end to really work in. I think of guys like in our past, Charles Johnson, year 3. I'm always looking at these defensive ends in year 3 to see, like, I'm not giving up on them. YGM fans they hate the dude. They hate the guy, but it's year 3. I mean, it's time to put up or shut up. Or you're saying he's putting up right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's doing the necessary.
No pads, though. Who knows?
Yeah, I think he's doing the necessary work. An issue that I had with him pretty regularly is he would take it looked like he would take the wrong gap, or he wasn't very assignment sound. He is putting in work after practice. I think he's a guy who, look, he's a natural 4-3 end. If there was a guy during the draft that I thought would have been traded, it would have been him. He has played 4-3 since he was in college. He's 265 and 6'5". He is kind of too bulky to play in space, but they've taken their time with him. And I think this coaching staff doesn't want to rule anybody out. I think that's been kind of one of the underlying traits of this is there's a lot of holdover talent that they are willing to invest time and education into. And I think, Barno was a guy who, just from his athletic makeup and all that other stuff, that I thought was going to be an immediate great fit in here. And so maybe they're going to take the patient approach, but I don't think they have the depth to really do that right now. So it's going to be very interesting to see some of these camp battles, especially if they bring in somebody, I don't think that they're going to make a splash signing at edge, but if they bring in somebody like Kyle Van Noy or Carl Nassib, I think that bounces one of the holdovers off the roster. I don't think they're going to be very, right now, my internal 53 in my head, I have them keeping 4 outside linebackers and 4 inside linebackers. And I think the young holdover guys are not as well positioned as they probably could have been had they not switched to a 4-3. They switched from a 4-3.
We've always run a 4-3 in Carolina, so I've got a lot of learning to do as we go forward. Why do we have so many safeties and no corners? I mean, and then I'm gonna ask that, and then the next kind of pivot question is where the hell does Jeremy Chin fit in?
Oh, okay. Actually, let's take that one first.
Because that's a conundrum, man. He's like crack the code on Jeremy Chin. He's awesome.
So Jeremy Chin is an extremely talented tweener player. That's the nice way of putting it. He played safety last year and was horrific. Like that, he was terrible last year.
Terrible?
Yeah, he was terrible last year.
He was nicked up on a bad team.
Okay, so what would you say is an outside presence to that definition?
I would say his first 2 years, he was pretty damn incredible. Yeah. And so, I don't know how to evaluate a player when they're hurt, when they're struggling through injury, and they're amidst complete dysfunction.
I don't think you have to put terrible on him. I think the production was terrible last year. Fair?
All right, I'll take it.
I will say this. Complete 180 this offseason. Holy moly. Okay, so they've put him at big nickel corner. He has made some plays in practice where he wouldn't have made them last year.
What is that when you say big nickel corner? And that's Shaq Thompson did that his rookie year too, who was very similar type player, kind of just a jack of all types of trade player back then. Ask old, you want a little fun tip about old Shaq Thompson, ask him if you could throw him a curveball. He was a professional baseball. He was 1 for 36 because he can't. And he said this in an interview once. It was awesome. He said, "I can't hit a curve." So, but he played big nickel. I think his rookie year was very productive. What does that ultimately mean assignment wise?
So you're going to play You're going to play 3 safeties deep as opposed to playing 3 corners and nickel. Essentially, what it'll do is
that's why we have so many safeties.
Right. It'll help you against the run in the fact that you basically have a linebacker playing nickel corner. Nickel has become probably one of the hardest positions to play in the NFL because you have to be able to tackle against the run. You have to be able to cover against the slot receiver who you can't press. And so you've got a lot of these responsibilities and you have to be able to do multiple things. And I think what they are doing with him at big nickel is they're safeguarding the run while also allowing his versatility to take shape. And I think he looks healthy. He looks really attuned to what he's doing. And I think from an educational standpoint, the way the staff has kind of given him the ball to run with is really impressive. I think, when you look at him and they go into dime, he'll play the dime linebacker role, which is good because you've got a guy who can play in coverage. He's not going to be great in coverage, but he can play in coverage. And then you would put in a more traditional nickel corner. The guy who has come up in conversations that I've had, Stanley Thomas Oliver, is a guy who's impressed a lot of people. He's known as a special teams ace, was out most of the last year with an injury, but he's impressed a lot of people. Dante Jackson went out of his way to praise him the other day. Jamie Robinson was brought in to long-term be a guy who can play nickel and free safety and strong safety and kind of work around the secondary. They want to have kind of a positionless secondary, it sounds like. And so where you can use the depth that they have at safety, they don't have the most talented safety depth chart, but they have the deepest or one of the deepest. Most teams want 4 safeties that can play at the NFL level. They have at least 6. So if you look at that as if you look at the Von, it's going to be a really interesting.
Von Bell is an underrated player in the NFL. I mean, he's been great everywhere.
So Von Bell, he's probably going to play closer to the line. Xavier Woods, while he can't catch an interception, is one of the best communicators in the league. He plays very well in coverage. He's going to play more free safety. Jeremy Chin's on that group. He can start if either one of those guys is injured. I think the role would be a little bit different than those guys if he had to fill in. On top of that, you've got Sam Franklin, who they like, who can play kind of everywhere. Jamie Robinson's a guy who can play in a lot of places. Probably don't want him as a starter, but he can move around. And then you've got Eric Rowe, who's a veteran who can play safety and nickel if you need him to. I think that's a really good outlook. And I think that's why you're seeing them favor safeties over corners, because getting corners that can play is really, really hard. A corner is a tough position to cultivate, especially from a depth standpoint. They really like J.C. Horn. They like Dante Jackson. They even restructured his contract to kick the can down the road. They've got C.J. Henderson. Like I said, Stanley Thomas Oliver's getting a lot of praise. Keith Taylor's been kind of up and down from the practices that we've watched, but it's early.
Has C.J. Henderson even been there?
Yeah, he has.
Is he just there like in a daze? What's his deal?
He was injured, like I think the first week of OTAs and maybe the second week, but he's played since. I mean, he's
quiet.
He's CJ Henderson. I see Sideshow Rob. Excuse me. Didn't want to call you by your other nickname, So Rajon Wright was injured. He had hernia surgery. That was the story that I broke earlier this week or last week. And so that was part of the reason why they think he fell in the draft. But he's got really good size. He was obviously on Last Chance U, so he's got like a little small following there. But J.C. Horton and him have got a relationship that goes back a few years, and that's part of the reason why he signed here. He was also recruited by safeties coach Burt Watts at JUCO and in high school. So anyway, he was sidelined for like the first 3 practices of the offseason program, and then he practiced a lot during mini camp and got some limited reps, and he looked pretty good. He looks the part.
What's the real story with J.C. Horn's ankle?
I mean, he got injured in a workout.
Did he roll it? Like, what is it? Like,
what it sounds like. He was in a boot a few days before they announced it. But I don't have anybody who actually saw the injury take place.
I need you to find out another thing for me, and that is, and no one's answered it for me, and that is, and you might already know the answer, was Dante Jackson's Achilles injury on the same foot that he always has the turf toe on, or are they separate feet?
I believe they're separate.
Compensation injury. Yuck. Hate that. No, we need these this secondary. You said Keith Taylor, there's questions there. How does this team go forward? I know everybody wants another defensive end. Is this just managed with what you got kind of on this defense this year?
Yeah, I think so. And I think they want it that way. I think sometimes when you're going through a transition to a different scheme or you're going through a transition to a different staff, you want guys who want to be there. You want gamers. You want guys that can prove that they can be foundational pieces. And like I said, they're going to have a ton of cap space next year. That's when you're going to see them make more for the win moves. And I think right now you want to set a base here, but you know that you have like excellent players at every level of this defense, but you need guys that, can be role players. And I think that that's what they need to cultivate here. You know, if JC Horn or Derek Brown goes down, you're going to feel it. Like you're going to see it. Like if Shaq Thompson goes down or Frankie Luvu goes down, you're going to feel those losses. And I think they've got to get beyond that. In order to do that, you've got to cultivate depth.
All right, man. Good stuff. There is final thoughts on this team as you get ready for training camp. What are you going to be writing about or thinking about preparing for? This is, again, you've covered several teams around the league. And as we hit this kind of, I don't want to call it a dead time. Look, people they want stuff. We have to manufacture it sometimes. And when I say manufacture, not the facts in the news, but the discussion in some cases. What should we be mentally thinking about as we prepare to go to Spartanburg? And my advice to you, if it's your first time in Spartanburg, bro, get ready. That shit is the armpit of hell heat. It's just dead. And I'm from Eastern North Carolina, so I'm used to hot, humid. It's just dead heat too. There's no damn breeze. It's just freaking miserable out there. We're just baking in the sun. Other than getting ready with our sunscreen and tons of water as we go out there and look at these practices, what should we be mentally thinking about and preparing over the next 30 days as we get ready to go to Spartanburg, South Carolina?
Well, now I can't think about anything else.
Oh yeah, you are going to be sweating, bro. You are going to be miserable, homie.
Yeah, I mean,
just go ahead and ready to shower twice a day.
I'm used to this Jacksonville heat, but
we'll see. We'll see. It's like a special dead heat. It's just weird, man. It's not fun.
I think the important thing to think about here is, keep your expectations measured. I mean, I think an 8-9, 9-8 record, even if they don't make the playoffs, is a really promising start for them.
Oh, yeah.
I think this team last year really was a 5-win team that overachieved and won 7 games. So I think if you look at it that way, if you get 2 games of growth from that, that's important. I think easing the expectations on Bryce Young, I mean, he's going to make those plays. You're going to be really impressed when you see him in training camp. I just think you also have to remember he's still a rookie. I think this offensive line is good, not great. And I think this wide receiver group is good, not great. So you got to kind of let him grow as it comes and work through that. And so
that sounds far too reasonable.
I'm a beat writer. I'm not a fan. So, I mean, that's kind of my job, right?
I know. I'm being sarcastic.
No, I know. But, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, by the way. If you haven't subscribed already, you should. This is a great interview.
Thank you. So look, 30 days of, I mean, it's going to be hot. It's going to be hot. You'll be ready for that. We'll be watching your work as the 53 comes out. We'll be looking to see, do you think if there is a move made, and there will be, there's always going to be some additions, sure, whether they're splash names like a Clowney or something like that. Mm-hmm. And those, again, would be temporary fixes. We're all waiting to see where DeAndre Hopkins fits in. I don't expect it to be here necessarily. But do you expect this team to wait until the training camp kind of time for that? Is like let the market just do what it does? Or could there be something in that next 30 days to get the guy that they think could add to this team ready for camp?
It's a great question, and I wish I knew the answer, but I do think, they are, they've got to keep track of what they're doing with Brian Burns. I think a lot of that plays into that. And I think, there's some injuries here you got to monitor. While Dante Jackson, JC Horn, and Brian Burns are all expected to go
they're all nicked up.
Yeah, they're all nicked up. And on top of that, you never know what can happen in a rehab process. So, I mean, corner and edge are the two most important positions, frankly, in this defense, and they're light. So,
and
I mean,
injuries determine everything in the NFL. How many great teams have been ruined by injury, and how many teams have had success just because they had a healthy fucking season? You know, I mean, that's it. When you look at a team that does well, they just their line sticks together. The teams are there. All right, great stuff, Mike. Look, I need you to tell them on Twitter. I can tell them Mike_EK, but you can also tell them where they can get you on Twitter and also why they should go to the Charlotte Observer and support Charlotte media because they need that inside tip on the Carolina Panthers.
Well, I think pre-interview we said we would do 15 minutes. We're at 51 minutes.
Yeah.
So, I bring the goods.
Pay the man.
I bring the goods. Like, you'll see everything that I do with practice notes. If you can't make it down to training camp, you'll see they're extremely thorough. If you just look at my OTA notes, we're gonna have a lot of really good deep depth features on a lot of your favorite players, a lot of the players you might not know or not know enough about. I saw a lot of Rajon Wright fans on here. We just did a feature where he kind of explained his pre-draft process, where he's at in his rehab, all that stuff that you can check up on charlotteobserver.com. We just did a story on Bradley Bozeman and him becoming a father, which,
by the way, somebody needs to hire his wife as a PR woman.
Yeah,
she is just a mastermind of his socials. Yeah,
she's great. Nikki's terrific. But you can find me on Twitter at Mike_E_KAYE. Sorry, it's the worst handle in Twitter, but you'll remember it hopefully. And then, like I said, sign up for the Observer. There's a bunch of stuff on my timeline right now. You can subscribe through that. And when it comes time for training camp, if you live in Connecticut or Wisconsin or whatever, I can be your
or across the pond, like 3 people in this chat room.
Oh, hey,
right
Rich
Kingston. Yeah, man, we got an international audience here. You guys can get the inside tip. Pay this man. I milked him for his time. And he won't get paid directly, but let's keep the damn thing alive. Mike, so fantastic stuff. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. Thank you, man, for your generosity with your time. And I'll thank you again right after I hit the end of this. Guys, tomorrow night, Tuesday night, live, C3 Panthers Podcast, 9 p.m. You know the number, 252-228-5098. Call in. We're going to have a blast.